Hey everyone, wanted to talk to you about Chapter 14, which is all about labor relations and collective bargaining. Again, such an important topic. As you saw, as I posted in the kind of introductory video, again, unions, while not nearly as powerful and influential as they were 50, 60, 70 years ago, still a major, factor in American, labor law, specifically with employee relations and with human resources. So again, still a big thing, something we definitely still want to talk about. So again, and this is, even though there's only one chapter this week, there's a lot in this chapter. There's so much detail. And again, we could spend a whole semester on this one topic. I actually teach a class at UNSL, at the University of Missouri St. Louis, on this very topic, labor relations and collective bargaining. And it's the only thing that we talk about all semester. So, I'm trying to basically cram a semester's worth of stuff into, one chapter. It can be very difficult. So I want to hit the highlights for you so that, again, I want you to read the whole chapter. But again, I want to make sure you understand the main points that I hope you take away. On page 622 in your textbook, it looks just like this. It's kind of a list. I mean, you don't need to memorize this list, but it's all about typical provisions in collective bargaining contracts. So it talks about how wages are determined, what are the rights for both union rights and management rights? How does paid time off work? How does, benefits work? How do employees get raises? So most union contracts, and labor negotiations focus on what we call the terms and conditions of employment. Things, like wages and benefits and time off, and how do promotions work? How can you apply for a promotion at your work? How do layoffs work? If a company has to lay people off, is there a priority list for that? All those details are negotiated during negotiations and during the collective bargaining process. And as you can imagine, it can be very intense. I know I've personally been involved in discussions as well. Sometimes they're very cordial and both the union and the management have very similar goals and it's easy to work it out. Other times it's very contentious, where management and the union just don't see eye to eye on whatever the topic is. And it can become very, very, crazy to see kind of how the sides go back and forth. And it can even get litigious if it goes too far. So again, really important to kind of understand how that process works. Your book talks about things like right to work laws, and that is something that I definitely want you to pay attention to because the assignment that you're going to be doing this week has related to right to work laws. Essentially, when you see the term, and it applies basically to U.S. states. So if your state is a right to work state, it means that if you're joining an organization that is union represented, if you have a right, if it's a right to work, it means you do not have to join the union to be able to be employed. If a state is a not right to work state, then, as a term and condition of employment, you have to join the union in order to have a job, in an organization that is unionized. So that's kind of, there's a few other differences that you'll read about, but that's kind of what I want you to take away is whether or not, your state, is a right to work state or is not a right to work state. So again, what you tend to see, and I don't want to make this as a plain, hard rule, but most states that are right to work tend to be more red states, more conservative states, where unionization is not as popular, and states that tend to be not right to work states, excuse me, tend to be more blue states politically or more liberal states. And again, I don't want you to think that that's a hard, fast rule because it's not, but generally that's what you see in kind of the U.S. economy. So make sure you pay attention to the area on right to work. And again, because whatever you learn in your textbook, you're going to apply that to the assignment that you're going to do this week. On page 632 of your textbook, it talks about things like concerted activity and are you excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, which is the law that kind of governs a lot of what we're talking about. So again, I don't expect you to memorize all of those, but I think it's a really important thing for you to look at to determine, what rights even that you personally have under the National Labor Relations Act. Again, you'll read about that act in the chapter, but again, that's kind of the law that governs a lot of labor relations and management relations laws in the country. So again, I want you to kind of know, who is included and who is excluded from kind of union protection and things like that. So again, very important for you to learn. So, a couple other kind of topics I want you to look at, and these next three things that I'm going to mention, I'll be brutally honest. All three of these are going to be questions on the exam, so make sure that you read these areas. One is about why do employees join unions? There's a good section, and people join unions for a variety of reasons. And again, there's too many reasons to list, but there will be a question on the exam about why employees join unions. So make sure you read that section very carefully. One additional thing that I want to mention is your text talks about, when when the union specifically, maybe doesn't get what they want, or they feel like that management's not listening to them, or they're not bargaining in good faith, whatever the reason is, they can call strikes, and obviously, I'm sure most of us are well aware of what happens, when employees strike, they go out on a picket line and, they demand better wages. You've probably seen examples of strikes or picket lines, either on TV, on the internet, or maybe even your personal life. So, one thing that I really want you to know is a term called secondary boycotts. And basically, what that means is, if management is you work for a company and you go out on strike, what the union cannot do, and this is protected by law, is ask you to strike. So if you're striking against Walmart, well, then they can't say, okay, well, because you work for Walmart, you're going to go strike against Target, and then you're going to strike against the suppliers of Walmart. Those are secondary groups, and so secondary boycotting is pretty much illegal. So again, make sure you read that section on secondary boycotting. And finally, one little a number that I want you to know is 30. It's number 3030. Generally, and again, U.S. labor law is changing, and this number may be changing over time in the not too distant future. But for now, generally, when a union comes into an organization and they want to sign up employees to create a union, or at least vote on a union, they need at least 30% of the eligible workforce to sign a card that says, yes, I want to have a union election. So then once you have a union election, then let's say that there's 100 employees. Once you have an election, it just has to be 51% or greater than 50 of the employees want a union, then you actually would have a union and they would start negotiating. But the union only needs 30% of the employees to actually to sign a card to call for an election. So just remember that is the key number, 30, and that's a test question. So just make sure you read the section about that. So again, I could go on forever because there's so much detail in this chapter, but I wanted to give you the main highlights of the things that I think are most important and they're most relevant, things that I see daily in my work when I work with unions specifically. So thanks again, everyone. I appreciate your attentiveness, and good luck with this week's assignments.